The menace of Whisper Creek Road. The last sliver of sun dipped behind the jagged silhouette of the Blue Ridge foothills, casting long, distorted shadows across Whisper Creek Road. Mr. Henderson, his '98 Ford Ranger grumbling beneath him, downshifted as he approached the bend near the old McCulloch barn. He'd just finished an exhausting day wrangling fencing wire and ornery heifers, and all he wanted was his supper and a quiet evening. Then he saw it. A flash of scruffy reddish-brown fur in the middle of the asphalt. A furry roadblock defying the encroaching twilight. It was Rascal again. The dog stood its ground, tail held high, a defiant sentinel against the roar of Henderson's engine. Mr. Henderson sighed, a gusty sound that filled the cab. He'd seen this dance before, usually with other drivers, but never had Rascal chosen his truck as the primary audience. Night. Rascal didn't budge. Instead, it let out a series of short, sharp barks, its head cocked, eyes gleaming with an unnerving intensity. It was almost as if the dog was trying to communicate something, a thought Mr. Henderson quickly dismissed as the fatigue playing tricks on his mind. This dog was a menace. Everyone knew it. Just last week, Martha Higgins had nearly T-boned old man Abernathy's tractor, trying to swerve around the beast. Martha, usually unflappable, had been shaking like a leaf when she recounted the tale at the general store. "That dog has a death wish, I swear," she'd declared, slamming her fist on the counter. "Or it's trying to cause one." And then there was young Timmy Miller, who, in a desperate attempt to avoid hitting Rascal, had fishtailed his mother's minivan into a ditch, leaving him stranded for hours until his dad could pull him out. The dog, meanwhile, had simply vanished into the brush, only to reappear a day or two later, usually at the most inconvenient times. Mr. Henderson honked, a short, impatient blast. Rascal merely barked back, louder this time, then took a single step forward, then another, directly towards the truck. It wasn't aggressive, not exactly, but it was certainly insistent. Its eyes, even in the dim light, held an almost pleading quality. Nonsense, Henderson told himself. It was a stray, probably hungry, looking for a handout, or worse, looking for trouble. He put the truck in park, the transmission clunking. This was going to take a minute. He decided to wait it out, hoping the dog would eventually lose interest. He watched as Rascal paced a short distance ahead, occasionally glancing back at the truck, then back towards the darkening woods that bordered the road. It seemed agitated, restless, its entire body language screaming urgency. The next morning, the air still held a crisp pre-dawn chill. Brenda Jenkins was already running late. Her youngest, 8-year-old Lily, had decided her meticulously chosen outfit for school was too scratchy, leading to a meltdown that cost Brenda 10 precious minutes. Now, her ancient minivan, affectionately nicknamed the Beast, rattled along Whisper Creek Road, the dashboard clock ticking ominously. "Come on, Beast, faster!" she muttered, drumming her fingers on the steering wheel. Her coffee, a lukewarm concoction from a travel mug, did little to soothe her frayed nerves. She rounded the same bend Mr. Henderson had encountered the previous evening, and her heart sank. There, in the middle of the road, was the familiar shaggy form. Rascal. Again. "Are you kidding me?" Brenda hissed, slamming on the brakes. The Beast shuddered to a halt, and in the back, 10-year-old Jake let out an indignant squawk. Mom, my juice box! Quiet, Jake, Brenda snapped, her voice strained. It's that stupid dog again. Rascal, seemingly unfazed by the sudden stop, stood firm. Its tail wagged once, a slow, deliberate sweep, before it let out a series of yips. Unlike the previous evening, the sun was now beginning to peek over the trees, casting a golden glow on the dog's fur, making its eyes even more prominent. They were fixed on Brenda, a gaze that felt almost accusatory. Brenda checked her watch. 7:40 a.m. School started at 8:15, and the 20-minute drive was now easily a 25-minute affair with this obstruction. Then she had to fight rush hour to get to the clinic by 9 o'clock. This was not just an inconvenience, it was a threat to her carefully constructed daily schedule. "Move it, you mangy mutt!" she yelled, laying on the horn. The sound ripped through the quiet morning, making Lily wince. Rascal, however, remained resolute. It took a few steps away from the van, then looked back, as if expecting Brenda to follow. "Oh, no you don't," Brenda muttered, her jaw tight. "I'm not falling for that." She tried to edge the minivan around the dog, easing forward slowly, her eyes darting between the dog and the narrow shoulder. Just as she thought she had enough room, Rascal darted forward again, placing itself squarely in her path. "Seriously!" she exclaimed, hitting the brakes once more. This time, a genuine growl escaped her lips. "What is wrong with you, dog? You're going to get yourself killed, and you're going to make me late." Rascal let out another series of barks, a slightly different tone this time, more urgent, almost frantic. It took a few steps into the tree line, then looked back again, its gaze piercing. Brenda stared at the dog, a strange unease settling in her stomach. It wasn't just being a nuisance, there was something else in its eyes, something she couldn't quite decipher. But she didn't have time to decipher anything. She had to get her kids to school. "Mom, we're gonna be late!" Jake wailed from the back, already anticipating the tardy slip. Brenda slammed her hand on the steering wheel. This was beyond frustrating. This dog wasn't just a stray. It was a deliberate, calculating obstruction, a furry, four-legged agent of chaos. She took a deep breath, trying to calm her racing pulse. She had two choices: either sit here and wait for the dog to decide to move, or she looked at the dog, then at the woods. The dog looked back, its head tilted, a silent question in its eyes. For a moment, just a fleeting one, Brenda considered turning around. But the alternative route was 10 miles longer, ensuring they'd be even later. She clenched her teeth. No, she would not let a stray dog dictate her morning. She leaned on the horn again, a long, sustained blast that echoed through the quiet valley. Rascal, however, seemed to dig its heels in even deeper. It barked again, a high-pitched, insistent sound, then took another step into the woods, looking over its shoulder, practically begging her to follow. A plea in pause. The shriek of tires on asphalt tore through the twilight, a sound intimately familiar to Mr. Henderson. His aging sedan bucked, then slammed back as he stomped the brake with jaw-rattling force. "Not again," he exhaled, the words laced with weary resignation. There, a defiant reddish-brown silhouette against the fading light, stood Rascal, squarely in the middle of Whisper Creek Road. The dog's tail, usually a whirlwind of energy, was rigid, its body coiled. Mr. Henderson leaned forward, peering through the windshield. The animal wasn't merely standing, it was circling in a tight, anxious rhythm, a low, guttural whine vibrating in its chest. His stomach rumbled in protest, a reminder of the shepherd's pie awaiting him, but the furry obstruction held his immediate focus. He laid on the horn, an impatient, sustained blast that typically sent even the most stubborn deer scattering. Rascal, however, only flinched, then turned its head, fixing Mr. Henderson with an unblinking gaze. This was no longer the mischievous glint he'd come to expect from the dog's antics. Something else resided there, a sensation that pricked at the edges of his ingrained annoyance. The dog's eyes, usually bright and playful, now appeared shadowed, almost frenzied. Rascal let out a sharp bark, imbued with an unusual urgency, then retreated a step, glancing over its shoulder toward the dense tree line bordering the road. It was an almost imperceptible movement, yet it snagged Mr. Henderson's attention. "What in the blazes are you up to now, you scruffy menace?" he grumbled, but the usual heat of his frustration felt muted, supplanted by a nascent unease. He watched as Rascal barked again, a series of rapid, staccato yaps, its body trembling. It was as if the dog were striving to convey a message, its entire posture a desperate entreaty. This wasn't the same creature that chased squirrels up oak trees or playfully nudged Brenda Jenkins's groceries. This was distinct. This was imperative. He shifted in his seat, his grip on the steering wheel slackening. The early evening air, usually a welcome balm after a day's work, now felt thick with unspoken tension. He scrutinized Rascal's behavior, the frantic pacing, the urgent barks, the way it repeatedly glanced between the woods and him, its ears twitching. It was a pattern, a recurring sequence of actions that defied simple explanation. Was it injured? Was it safeguarding something? Or was it, as he'd long suspected, merely a particularly obstinate beast determined to inconvenience every driver on Whisper Creek Road? The latter thought, however, felt less convincing than usual. The desperation in the dog's eyes was undeniable, a raw, almost human plea that cut through his preconceived notions. He glimpsed a flash of vulnerability, a profound need that transcended typical animal behavior. It wasn't just an annoyance, it was a distress signal. He recalled Brenda's outburst from earlier, her exasperation mirroring his own. "That dog is more trouble than he's worth," she'd declared, her voice echoing in his memory. But now, observing Rascal's almost frantic insistence, he wondered, could there be more to this? Could this persistent, maddening obstruction be a genuine cry for help? A shiver traced its way down his spine, despite the car's lingering warmth. He looked at the dense, encroaching forest, shadows deepening with the receding sun. It was easy to get lost in those woods, even for someone who knew them well. A sudden thought, cold and unsettling, flickered through his mind. What if Rascal wasn't the problem, but a harbinger? What if this dog, this furry roadblock that had caused so much frustration, was trying to warn them of something far more serious than a delayed supper? He released a long sigh, the air whistling through his lips. He was tired, yes, and hungry, but something about Rascal's current demeanour wouldn't allow him to dismiss it as another one of its shenanigans. The dog barked again, a short, sharp sound, then took a tentative step towards the tree line, its head swivelling back to meet his gaze, as if imploring him to follow. Mr. Henderson hesitated. Every fibre of his being screamed at him to ignore the animal, to find a way around it, to get home and forget the maddening daily ritual. But the desperation in Rascal's eyes held him captive, a silent, powerful demand that overrode his rational desire for a peaceful evening. He found himself reaching for the gear shift, not to put the car in reverse, but to slide it into park. A strange, unfamiliar curiosity was beginning to sprout in the fertile ground of his profound frustration. Into the woods we go. The engine's low thrum seemed to deepen the ensuing quiet. Mr. Henderson's gaze fixed on Rascal, who, instead of retreating, advanced a few steps, then glanced back with an intensity that resonated deep within him. This wasn't the boisterous, tail-wagging invitation of a playful pet, but a stark, almost desperate appeal. The dog's ears were sharply erect, its body coiled, and a soft whimper vibrated in its chest, a sound that bypassed his intellect, settling directly into his gut. "What is it, boy?" he murmured, more to himself than to the canine. Yet Rascal seemed to comprehend. It whipped its head towards the thick tree line bordering the road, took a step, then paused, a backward glance confirming Mr. Henderson's attention. His rational mind screamed, "Get back in the car, drive away, this is ridiculous." A delivery route awaited, a schedule to uphold. Still, the vivid, unsettling image of that old man in the ditch flashed. He couldn't shake the premonition. This wasn't about a lost ball or a squirrel chase. This felt different. He unclipped his seatbelt, the click echoing in the truck's confined space. With a sigh heavy with resignation and a burgeoning sense of unease, he nudged open the door. The fresh, cool morning air, laden with damp earth and pine, enveloped him. He stepped out, his boots crunching on the loose gravel, and secured the door with a soft thud. Rascal, sensing his commitment, emitted a short, sharp bark. Not aggressive, but urgent, and bolted off the road. Mr. Henderson watched the dog vanish into a narrow opening in the trees, a barely discernible track choked with overgrown brush and fallen leaves. He hesitated briefly, the shadows beneath the dense canopy appearing particularly deep and forbidding. This was no casual ramble. This was entering the woods. He followed, pushing aside a low-hanging branch that scraped his jacket. The world instantly transformed. The roar of his truck vanished, replaced by the rustle of leaves underfoot and the distant calls of unseen birds. The air grew cooler, dappled sunlight filtering through the canopy in shifting, liquid patterns. The dirt path, barely wide enough for one person, meandered deeper, past gnarled roots and moss-covered stones. Rascal was a fleeting shadow ahead, occasionally pausing to peer back, its eyes gleaming in the dim light, before resuming its relentless pace. It clearly knew this terrain. Moving with an effortless grace, Mr. Henderson, with his stiff knees and work boots, could only envy. He found himself quickening his stride, a peculiar blend of frustration and mounting anxiety propelling him forward. What could be so vital that a stray dog would act as a beacon, guiding a stranger into the unknown? The path descended gradually, the trees thickening, their branches interlocking overhead to form a natural, verdant archway. The sounds of civilization entirely receded, supplanted by the hushed symphony of the forest. He inhaled the rich, decaying scent of leaf litter, punctuated by the sharp, clean aroma of conifers. A small stream gurgled somewhere to his left, its sound a faint, constant whisper. Every few yards, Rascal would halt, its head cocked, listening intently, then pivot and press on. Its demeanour was less guide, more scout, constantly assessing, constantly urging him forward. Mr. Henderson's initial irritation had long since melted away, replaced by a prickle of genuine concern. The playful dog he knew from the roadside, the one that sometimes chased his delivery truck for a block or two, was gone. This was a creature on a mission, and he, an unwilling yet compelled participant. He realized he had no idea where he was headed or how far he'd already come. The sun was now a distant, hazy glow above the treetops, rendering direction indiscernible. The path grew fainter, sometimes disappearing entirely under a blanket of fallen leaves, only to reappear a few feet ahead. He stumbled once, catching himself on a rough tree trunk, his heart thumping in his chest. A cold knot of apprehension tightened in his stomach. What if this was a mistake? What if the dog was simply leading him into trouble? He called out, his voice sounding oddly small in the vastness of the woods. "Rascal! Where are we going?" The dog stopped, its head turning, not to him, but deeper into the dense undergrowth, its body stiffening. A low growl rumbled in its throat, a sound of warning, not aggression. Then, with a sudden burst of speed, it vanished behind a thick cluster of bushes. Mr. Henderson broke into a trot, his breath rasping, a chill running down his spine that had nothing to do with the cool morning air. He pushed through the bushes, his jacket snagging, and emerged onto a small, open clearing. There, nestled against the base of a massive oak, was a dark, unmoving shape. The deepening mystery. The clearing wasn't merely an open space, it was a gash in the forest's hide, a sudden, barren interruption where ancient trees recoiled, leaving an irregular circle of churned earth and brittle undergrowth. Above the canopy formed a tight weave, sifting the late afternoon sun into a shifting tapestry of weak, wavering shadows across the hushed ground. The air, redolent with damp soil and decay, held an unusual stillness, a stark absence of the typical sylvan rustle and chirp. Mr. Henderson, his breath still ragged from his unexpected dash, paused at the fringe of this desolate expanse, his eyes sweeping for Rascal. The dog had shot ahead, a blur of brown fur vanishing behind a thorny tangle of hawthorn bushes at the clearing's far side, leaving him in an unsettling quiet. A low, guttural growl, barely piercing the frantic thrumming of his own heart, had preceded Rascal's disappearance, a sound more akin to warning than welcome. "Rascal, where are you?" he called, his voice thin and reedy, swallowed by the oppressive silence. No reply came, only the faint, mocking echo of his own query. A shiver, distinct from the cooling air, snaked down his spine. He clutched the delivery manifest tighter, the crinkling paper a small, defiant comfort against the creeping unease. His gaze, drawn by an unspoken premonition, finally fixed on the dark, inert mass huddled at the clearing's core. Indistinct at first, a mere blotch against the muted greens and browns, it solidified as his eyes sharpened, a cold knot of recognition tightening in his gut. A human form, utterly, chillingly still. A wave of nausea washed over Mr. Henderson. He'd been so fixated on the chase's absurdity, its sheer improbability, that the reality of what Rascal might have been leading him to had been relegated to his mind's furthest corners. Now it struck him with the force of a physical blow. The nagging doubt, the frustration of this deviation from his meticulously planned route, all dissolved, replaced by a stark, undeniable terror. He took a hesitant step, then another, his boots crunching on dry leaves. The clearing seemed to stretch now, the distance to the dark shape expanding with each tentative movement. The air grew colder, or perhaps it was his own internal thermostat plummeting. His mind, usually a bastion of logic, was assailed by a torrent of horrifying possibilities. An accident? A fall? Or something far more sinister? He considered the wood's quiet isolation, the sort of place where fates could unfold unwitnessed. A sudden rustle in the hawthorn bushes made him flinch, his head snapping towards the sound. Rascal emerged, not from where he'd vanished, but from a different patch of undergrowth, closer to the prone figure. The dog's tail hung still, his usual ebullience replaced by a low, mournful whine. He looked at Mr. Henderson, his large brown eyes wide and pleading, then back at the shape, as if imploring him to hurry, to comprehend. Mr. Henderson felt a renewed surge of urgency, propelled by the dog's palpable distress. He broke into a stumbling run, his earlier exhaustion forgotten in the face of this deepening mystery. As he neared, the figure's details resolved, terrifyingly clear. It was an elderly man, his clothes askew, lying in an awkward, unnatural sprawl. His face was pale, eyes closed, and a dark stain bloomed on the earth beneath his head. "Oh, good heavens!" Mr. Henderson whispered, the words catching in his throat. He dropped to his knees beside the man, his hands trembling as he reached out, not daring to touch. His medical training, a faint echo from a long-abandoned first aid course, screamed at him to check for a pulse, to assess breathing. But a primal fear held him back, a reluctance to disturb the unsettling stillness, to confirm the worst. Rascal nudged his hand with his wet nose, then let out another soft whine, nudging the man's still form with his snout. A gentle, almost desperate gesture. Mr. Henderson swallowed hard, forcing himself to breathe, settling over him. What had he stumbled settling over him? What had he stumbled into? The last slivers of an orange sun bled into the horizon, painting the western sky in bruised purples and fading reds. The forest, already dense and forbidding, now swallowed the remaining light greedily. Shadows, once mere suggestions, stretched into menacing, elongated figures, dancing with every rustle of the leaves. Mr. Henderson, still hunched over the unmoving form, felt the chill of the approaching night seep into his bones, a cold that had nothing to do with the temperature. Rascal whined again, a low, sorrowful sound that seemed to echo the silence of the woods. He nudged the elderly man's stiff hand with his snout, then looked up at Mr. Henderson with wide, expressive eyes, as if pleading for an explanation, for a solution. But Mr. Henderson had none. His mind, usually a neatly catalogued collection of delivery routes and inventory counts, was a jumbled mess of fear and disbelief. This wasn't happening. He was a delivery driver, not not a witness. He fumbled for his phone, his fingers stiff and clumsy. The screen flickered to life, the weak signal bars mocking his desperation. No service. Of course, this remote stretch of the woods was always a dead zone, a fact he usually appreciated for its quiet solitude. Now, it was a trap. "Hello?" he called out, his voice a reedy whisper that sounded alien in the vastness. "Is anyone there?" The question hung in the air, swallowed by the growing gloom. Only the rustle of leaves, the distant hoot of an owl, and the incessant buzz of unseen insects answered him. His own breathing, ragged and shallow, seemed to amplify the silence, making it heavier, more oppressive. He tried again, louder this time, a desperate plea. "Hello! Can anyone hear me?" His voice cracked on the last word, betraying the tremor that had started in his hands and was now working its way up his arms. He strained his ears, hoping for a return call, a distant shout, anything to break the terrifying isolation. But there was nothing. Just the whispers of the wind through the pines, sounding like hushed conversations he couldn't quite decipher. Each gust seemed to carry a fleeting, chilling message, just out of his grasp. Rascal, sensing his distress, pressed closer to his leg, a warm, furry anchor in the deepening twilight. The dog's presence, which had been an annoyance just hours ago, was now a small comfort. At least he wasn't entirely alone. But even Rascal seemed to be affected by the sombre atmosphere, his usual energetic tail now drooping, his gaze fixed on the still figure of the man on the ground. Mr. Henderson slowly straightened up, his back protesting with a dull ache. He scanned the tree line, now a solid, impenetrable wall of black. Every shadow seemed to hold a lurking presence. Every snap of a twig sounded like an approaching footstep. His imagination, usually a dormant faculty, was now running wild, conjuring images of things that went bump in the night, things that surely lived in these forgotten corners of the world. He glanced down at the old man again. The wound on his head was stark against his pale skin, a dark, congealed patch that spoke of violence. It wasn't a simple fall. This wasn't an accident. A shiver, colder than the night air, snaked down his spine. He wasn't just a witness. He was embroiled in something far more sinister than a lost package or a broken delivery schedule. He was a man alone in the darkening woods, with a dead body, a loyal but distressed dog, and no way to call for help. The weight of the situation pressed down on him, suffocating him. He had to think. He had to act. But what? The options, like the light, were fading fast. The silence that followed his unanswered calls wasn't just empty. It was pregnant with unspoken threats, with the enormity of his predicament. He was truly on his own. A whine at the ditch. The oppressive silence of the forest pressed in on Mr. Henderson, broken only by the frantic thumping of his own heart against his ribs and Rascal's ragged breaths. The air grew heavier with each step, thick with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves. Dusk had deepened into a twilight so profound it felt like the world was holding its breath. Rascal, who had been pulling at the leash with a singular purpose, suddenly stiffened, his ears swivelling. He halted so abruptly that Mr. Henderson, lost in his spiralling thoughts, almost stumbled over him. The dog stood rigid, nose twitching, a low, guttural whine rumbling in his chest. His gaze was fixed, not on the path ahead, but to his left, at a dark, ragged line in the undergrowth that Mr. Henderson hadn't noticed. It was a ditch, deeper and wider than he'd initially perceived, cloaked by shadows and a dense tangle of brambles. Rascal's whine intensified, a mournful sound that prickled the hairs on Mr. Henderson's arms. It was different from his earlier insistent barks. This was a plea, a lament. "What is it, boy?" Mr. Henderson whispered, his voice hoarse, barely audible above the rustling of his own clothes as he shifted his weight. The cold dread that had settled in his stomach tightened its grip. He didn't want to look, didn't want to see what new horror awaited them. But Rascal's unwavering stare, the sheer conviction in his posture, left him no choice. He took a hesitant step forward, pulling at the leash, though Rascal barely budged, his focus absolute. The dog's soft whines continued, a continuous thread of sound in the deepening gloom. He nudged his head towards the ditch, then looked back at Mr. Henderson, his large brown eyes wide and pleading. It was a clear invitation, an urgent summons. This was it then, the end of their strange, terrifying journey. With a deep, shaky breath, Mr. Henderson released the leash, letting it drop to the damp ground. He felt a sudden, inexplicable surge of resentment towards the dog, a fleeting thought that if Rascal hadn't been so insistent, so relentless, he wouldn't be standing here, on the precipice of another nightmare. But the thought vanished as quickly as it came, replaced by a cold, sharp blade of fear. He approached the edge of the ditch, his boots crunching on fallen leaves and twigs. The ground sloped steeply downwards, disappearing into an abyss of shadow. The air here was different, colder, carrying a faint, metallic tang that Mr. Henderson couldn't immediately identify, but instinctively recoiled from. He squinted, trying to pierce the gloom. Rascal remained at his side, a furry sentinel, his body tense, his whines now softer, more subdued, as if he knew the discovery was imminent. Mr. Henderson leaned forward, clutching a gnarled tree root for support. The ditch was deeper than he'd thought, perhaps 10 or 12 feet, a natural gully carved out by centuries of runoff. His eyes scanned the murky depths, searching, dreading what they might find. The faint light filtered through the canopy, barely illuminating the bottom. Then he saw it. A splash of colour, incongruous against the browns and greens of the forest floor. A bright blue jacket, partially obscured by a fallen log. His breath hitched. He felt a wave of nausea wash over him, his stomach lurching. He didn't need to see more. The metallic tang in the air suddenly made sense, mingling with the earthy scent of decay. It was blood. Rascal nudged his hand with his wet nose, then let out another soft whine, a sound of profound sadness. Mr. Henderson swallowed hard, his throat dry and constricted. He peered closer, his eyes adjusting to the low light. The blue jacket, and next to it, a pale, still hand, partially covered by leaves. The fingers were curled inward, as if grasping at something that wasn't there. "Oh, God," he whispered, the words barely escaping his lips. His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat of terror. This wasn't just a body. This was another person, Another life extinguished, lying broken and forgotten in the silent embrace of the forest. The implications slammed into him with the force of a physical blow. 2 bodies, 2 deaths, and he, Mr. Henderson, the unwitting delivery driver, was now tangled in a web far more sinister than he could have ever imagined. He backed away from the edge of the ditch, stumbling slightly, his legs feeling like lead. Rascal watched him, his tail drooping, a silent accomplice in this grim discovery. The dog's whines had ceased, replaced by the heavy silence that pressed in again, amplifying the sound of Mr. Henderson's ragged breathing. He stood there, staring at the dark opening in the earth, the full weight of the situation crashing down on him. There was no cell service, no way out. Just him, Rascal, and 2 dead men in the heart of a vast, unforgiving wilderness. The night stretched out before him, an endless expanse of fear and uncertainty. The discovery. The oppressive blackness of the ditch seemed to swallow the meagre light from Mr. Henderson's phone, making the shadows writhe and stretch like grasping fingers. His breath hitched in his throat, a cold knot of dread tightening his chest. He braced himself, his mind screaming in protest, even as his feet moved him closer to the edge. Rascal, a low, continuous whine rumbling in his chest, nudged his hand with a wet nose, then pressed against his leg as if for reassurance. The dog's tension was a palpable thing, vibrating through Mr. Henderson's own trembling limbs. He leaned forward, holding the phone out like a fragile beacon, its beam wavering. The first thing he saw was a splash of faded denim, then a boot, lying at an unnatural angle. A small gasp escaped him. It was a man, crumpled at the bottom, partially obscured by fallen leaves and tangled undergrowth. This wasn't just another body. The blue jacket was gone. This man wore a familiar, albeit mud-stained, plaid shirt. "No," he whispered, the sound raw and disbelieving. Then a low groan, almost imperceptible against the rustle of leaves and the distant hoot of an owl, floated up from the depths. It was weak, strained, but undeniably human. Mr. Henderson felt a jolt, a surge of adrenaline that momentarily cleared the fog of terror. This one was alive. He scrambled to get a better angle, his phone beam cutting through the gloom. There, amidst the debris, lay Farmer McGregor. His face was pale and streaked with dirt, his eyes closed, a faint trickle of blood visible near his temple. One arm was bent at an odd angle beneath him, and his legs were tangled, his posture speaking of a long, agonizing fall. "Farmer McGregor?" Mr. Henderson's voice was hoarse, barely a whisper. "Can you hear me?" Another groan, a little stronger this time, and McGregor's eyelids fluttered open. His gaze was unfocused, struggling to anchor on Mr. Henderson's anxious face peering over the edge. A flicker of recognition, then a wince of pain as he tried to shift. "Mr. Henderson?" McGregor's voice was raspy, laced with weakness. Is that you?" Relief, sharp and unexpected, flooded Mr. Henderson. He was alive, but the relief was quickly tempered by the enormity of the situation. How long had McGregor been down there? How badly was he hurt? And the other man, the dead one? Rascal, sensing the change, stopped whining. He sat, his tail thumping softly against the damp earth, his gaze fixed on McGregor below. The desperate urgency that had driven him all evening had finally receded, replaced by a quiet vigilance. Mr. Henderson's mind raced, piecing together the fragmented clues. Rascal hadn't been trying to lead him to a dead man, not initially. He'd been trying to lead him to Farmer McGregor. The dog's repeated attempts to stop cars, his frantic barks, his insistent nudges, they all made horrifying sense now. Rascal hadn't been a nuisance, he'd been a hero. He'd been trying to get help for a man trapped and injured. And Mr. Henderson, blinded by his own assumptions and initial annoyance, had almost missed it. A profound sense of shame washed over him. He'd seen the dog as a problem, an obstacle, when all along Rascal had been a desperate messenger, a silent plea for help. The dog had been trying to save a life, and Mr. Henderson had nearly dismissed his efforts entirely. "Don't move, Farmer McGregor," Mr. Henderson called down, his voice steadier now, infused with a newfound purpose. "I'm going to get help. Just stay still." McGregor closed his eyes again, a weary sigh escaping his lips. "Been here a while, son. Took a tumble. Think my legs not right." The chilling reality of the other body, the man in the blue jacket, pressed in on Mr. Henderson. He couldn't ignore that. 2 men, one alive, one dead, in the same isolated stretch of woods. This was more than just an unfortunate accident for Farmer McGregor. This was something far darker, far more sinister. He pulled his phone out again, his fingers fumbling as he tried to dial. The signal was spotty out here, a familiar frustration in these rural parts. He had to get to higher ground, or at least somewhere with a clearer line. "Rascal," he said, his voice softer than he'd ever used with the dog before. "Good boy, Rascal." "You're a very good boy." The dog looked up at him, a faint wag of his tail, as if acknowledging the belated praise. Then he turned his gaze back to McGregor, a silent, sad sentinel. Mr. Henderson realised Rascal hadn't left McGregor's side, not truly. He'd only gone to fetch help, returning again and again, refusing to abandon the injured man. The night, which had felt impossibly long and terrifying, had just taken on a new, urgent dimension. He had to call for help, not just for Farmer McGregor, but for himself. He was knee-deep in a nightmare, and the dog, once an annoyance, was now his only guide through the deepening shadows. He took a deep, shuddering breath and began to climb back up the slight incline, Rascal trotting faithfully beside him. No longer a nuisance, but a silent, understanding companion in the face of burgeoning horror. The injured elder. The stark reality of McGregor's identity, coupled with the crushing weight of Rascal's true intent, struck Mr. Henderson like a physical blow. Shame, acrid and scalding, roiled in his gut. He'd cursed this animal, kicked at him, dismissed his frantic barks as a mere annoyance, never realising Rascal had been a desperate envoy, a silent plea for rescue. The forgotten corpse in the blue jacket now resurfaced, a fresh, icy dread. But McGregor, clinging to life, was the immediate imperative. "Hold on, farmer," Mr. Henderson gasped, his voice cracking with urgency and deep remorse. His hands scrabbled for purchase, eyes assessing the treacherous, crumbling incline. The gully, a natural depression deepened by years of rainfall, now seemed a gaping maw. Loose earth skittered under his worn boots as he began a careful, crab-like descent. Rascal, his whines silenced, settled at the edge, a quiet, understanding companion, his gaze unwavering on the prone figure below. The dog's steady vigil offered a strange solace, a quiet affirmation of his earned trust. Each step was deliberate, heralded by a soft cascade of pebbles. The air grew cooler at the bottom, thick with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves. He reached McGregor, whose breath hitched in ragged spasms, his face a ghostly mask of agony. His tweed jacket was ripped, caked with mud, one leg bent at a sickening angle beneath him. "Farmer McGregor," Mr. Henderson whispered, kneeling beside him, his voice softer than intended. "Are you all right? What happened?" McGregor's eyes, clouded with pain, slowly sharpened. A tremor racked his frame. "Henderson?" His voice was a reedy whisper, barely audible above the rustle of leaves. Thought I was finished." He tried to shift, a pained groan escaping his lips. "Leg, can't move it. Fell hours ago. Looking for a stray lamb." Hours. The word hung in the air, heavy with the relentless passage of time, of Rascal's unheeded pleas. Mr. Henderson's shame deepened, a bitter sediment. All those instances he'd shooed Rascal away, McGregor had been lying here, slowly fading. He gently probed around McGregor's leg, his touch feather-light. The farmer winced, a sharp intake of breath. "Definitely not right," Mr. Henderson murmured, his rudimentary medical knowledge screaming, "Fracture." He noticed a faint smear of blood on McGregor's temple too, suggesting a head injury during the fall. "Head all right, farmer?" McGregor blinked slowly. "A bit fuzzy. Dog. Your dog. He was here. Barking." He looked up, his gaze finding Rascal, who remained a sombre sentinel at the ditch's lip, his tail a motionless downward curve. A flicker of recognition, then gratitude, crossed McGregor's face. "Good dog," he whispered, a faint smile touching his lips, before dissolving into a grimace of pain. "He was trying to tell me," Mr. Henderson confessed, the words tasting like ash. "I didn't understand." "I'm so sorry, farmer." "No fault," McGregor mumbled, his eyes closing for a moment. "Just unlucky. And stupid. Should have watched my step." The farmer's confession, weak though it was, offered a fragile thread of hope. He was lucid enough to recall events, albeit vaguely, but the severity of his injuries was undeniable. He needed immediate medical attention. And the dead man was still out there. Two distinct, terrifying emergencies clamoured for his attention. Mr. Henderson carefully unbuttoned McGregor's jacket, checking for other obvious injuries, his fingers brushing against cold, clammy skin. Hypothermia was a grave risk. He glanced up at the sky, already a bruised purple on the horizon. Dusk was settling in, ushering in a sharp drop in temperature. Time was critical. "I'm going for help, farmer," Mr. Henderson stated, trying to keep his voice steady. "You stay put. Don't try to move." McGregor merely nodded, his eyes closing again, a faint tremor running through his body. Rascal's gaze remained fixed on the injured farmer, a silent promise to stand guard. Mr. Henderson felt a surge of fierce determination. He would atone for his blindness, for his harshness. He would get help for McGregor, and then he would confront the other horror, the one Rascal had so desperately tried to warn him about first. The woods, once a familiar comfort, now felt like a predatory maw, and he was squarely in its jaws. A call for help. The crisp air, once a refreshing balm, now felt like an icy vice squeezing Mr. Henderson's lungs. His shame was a hot coal in his stomach, churning with every laboured breath as he knelt beside McGregor. The farmer's face was a mask of pain, etched with the pale exhaustion of hours spent battling the cold and his injuries. "Hold on, McGregor," Henderson rasped, his voice rough with a mix of urgency and an unfamiliar tenderness. "Just hold on." His hands, usually steady and precise, fumbled in his pocket for his old flip phone. The device felt foreign, a relic from a forgotten era, its plastic casing slick with a thin sheen of sweat. He flipped it open, the small screen flickering to life, displaying a single, defiant bar of service. Hope, fragile yet tenacious, flickered within him. This remote patch of woods was notorious for its dead zones, vast swathes of silence that swallowed signals whole. He moved a few feet, then a few more, angling the phone skyward as if trying to pluck a signal from the frigid air itself. Finally, 2 bars appeared, then stubbornly retreated to 1. It would have to do. He punched in 911, his fingers clumsy, almost hitting the wrong numbers. The call connected after an agonizingly long ring. 911, what's your emergency? A calm, professional voice inquired, a stark contrast to the frantic beat of Henderson's own heart. "Yes, hello, my name is Arthur Henderson," he stammered, the words tumbling out in a rush. "I'm in the woods, near the old logging road. There's been an accident." He paused, trying to gather his thoughts, to articulate the chaotic reality before him. "A man, a farmer, McGregor, he's fallen into a gully. I think his leg is broken. He's been here for hours." "Sir, can you give me a more precise location?" the dispatcher asked, her voice still even, though a hint of urgency now laced her tone. "Are there any landmarks? Cross streets?" Henderson squeezed his eyes shut, picturing the winding, overgrown paths he'd begrudgingly followed Rascal down. "Landmarks. It's off the old logging road, past the abandoned sawmill. There's a creek, I think, and a big old oak tree with a lightning scar." "We're deep in the woods, maybe a mile or so from the main road." He hated how vague it sounded, how impossible it must seem. A pause stretched, heavy with the weight of McGregor's shallow breaths. Rascal, ever vigilant, sat patiently beside the injured farmer, his amber eyes fixed on Henderson, a silent, sombre sentinel. The dog offered no barks, no whines, just a steady, unwavering presence that spoke volumes. It was as if he understood the gravity of the situation, the delicate tightrope Henderson walked between 2 urgent emergencies. Rascal's quietude was a balm, a testament to the profound shift in their dynamic. He wasn't just a dog anymore, he was a steadfast ally, a silent partner in this desperate rescue. "Sir, can you stay on the line? We're trying to triangulate your position. Is anyone else with you?" The dispatcher's voice pulled him back from the edge of panic. "Yes, there's a dog," Henderson said, a wry, almost disbelieving smile touching his lips. "He's the one who found him. He led me here." He glanced at Rascal, who met his gaze with an unnerving understanding. "And there's something else," Henderson continued, his voice dropping, the shame returning with a vengeance. "Earlier, Rascal tried to warn me about something else. A body. I dismissed him. I have to report that, too. It's further north, maybe another mile or two along the creek bed. I haven't seen it myself, but he was insistent." The dispatcher's calm facade finally cracked. "A body, sir? You're reporting a deceased person as well?" Her voice was sharper now, laced with a new concern. "Can you confirm that?" "No, I can't confirm it," Henderson admitted, his voice raw. "But Rascal, he's never been wrong. Not about this. I'll lead you there after we get McGregor out."
"He deserves better than my blindness." The words were for the dispatcher, but the confession was for himself, and for the quiet, understanding dog beside him. He could feel McGregor's eyes on him, though the farmer remained silent, conserving his strength.
"All right, Mr. Henderson," the dispatcher said, her tone professional once more, though Henderson could hear the subtle hum of keyboards in the background, the rapid-fire commands being issued. "We're dispatching paramedics and law enforcement to your general area. Stay on the line if you can. We'll try to guide them in as close as possible. Can you keep Farmer McGregor warm?" Henderson looked around. The gully offered little in the way of shelter or warmth. He had his own jacket, a thin windbreaker that offered meagre protection against the biting cold. He took it off, ignoring the shiver that ran through him, and carefully draped it over McGregor's chest.
The farmer grunted, a small sound of acknowledgement.
"I've covered him with my jacket," Henderson reported, his voice tight. "We'll be waiting. Just please hurry." The one bar of service flickered precariously, threatening to vanish at any moment. He held the phone like a lifeline, his gaze sweeping the dense canopy above, straining for any sign of approaching help, for a break in the trees, for anything that might pierce the overwhelming silence of the forest. Rascal shifted, nudging his nose against McGregor's hand, a small, comforting gesture. Henderson felt a surge of gratitude, a profound, humbling realization that in this desolate place, surrounded by peril, his most reliable companion was the creature he had so foolishly dismissed. The long wait. The suffocating darkness that had descended moments ago now pressed in, a palpable weight on Mr. Henderson's chest. The urgent 911 call, a breathless torrent of details, still left him with the nagging sensation of an omitted crucial point. Now, only the interminable wait remained. The once comforting hush of the remote woods had morphed into a vast, echoing chasm, punctuated solely by McGregor's shallow, ragged breaths, and Rascal's occasional soft whimper. McGregor, slumped against the muddy ditch bank, had fallen silent, his earlier cries of pain now replaced by involuntary groans that escaped with each exhale. His pale, dirt-streaked face was barely discernible in the meagre moonlight piercing the dense canopy. Mr. Henderson shivered, the cold seeping into his bones despite the lingering adrenaline. He cinched his jacket tighter, yearning for a blanket, a fire, anything to ward off the encroaching chill. Rascal, a surprising sentinel, had settled beside McGregor, his warm, furry body a shield against the cold earth. Periodically, the dog nudged McGregor's hand with a wet nose, a gentle, encouraging gesture. Even in his pain-clouded state, McGregor seemed to acknowledge it, his fingers weakly stroking Rascal's head. It was a wordless exchange of comfort and unwavering presence, humbling Mr. Henderson to witness. This creature,
so recently dismissed as a nuisance, had transformed into a steadfast guardian, a silent companion in this desperate vigil. They're sending someone," Mr. Henderson stammered, his voice thin and reedy in the night's vast expanse. The silence had become unbearable. McGregor's eyes fluttered open, dark pools in his pallid face. "Good," he rasped, the single word a profound effort. He closed them again, his breathing growing shallower. Mr. Henderson glanced at his flip phone, its tiny screen a fragile beacon. An hour. Could it truly have been an hour since his call? It felt like an eon. Each minute stretched, heavy and sluggish, into an eternity. He tried to mentally retrace the route, to estimate the ambulance's journey across the winding, unpaved roads. The thought of them getting lost, of precious minutes bleeding away, sent a fresh wave of panic through him. He looked at Rascal, who remained motionless, his gaze fixed on McGregor. The dog's ears twitched occasionally, catching sounds Mr. Henderson couldn't discern. Was it the wind? A distant animal? Or the faint, almost imperceptible hum of an approaching vehicle? Mr. Henderson strained his own ears, but heard nothing beyond rustling leaves and an owl's distant hoot. The cold was merciless. It gnawed at his fingers and toes, seeped into his joints, and set his teeth chattering uncontrollably. He stamped his feet, a futile attempt to generate warmth. He pictured McGregor, exposed at the ditch's bottom, his injuries making him even more vulnerable to the biting air. A profound sense of helplessness washed over Mr. Henderson. His efforts were exhausted. Now he was utterly at the mercy of time and circumstance. His mind drifted to the other discovery, the body Rascal had led him to earlier. That, too, weighed heavily. Two separate tragedies, so close, so deep in the woods. It felt like a macabre novel, an impossibility in his quiet, uneventful life. He shivered again, a confluence of cold and dread. The woods, once a canvas of serene beauty, now held a sinister edge, a hidden darkness he was only just beginning to unravel. Rascal shifted, emitting another soft whine, then, to Mr. Henderson's surprise, began to gently lick McGregor's exposed hand. The rhythmic, comforting gesture seemed to calm the injured farmer, whose breathing, for a moment, appeared to steady. It was a small act, yet in the vast, cold stillness it felt monumental, a testament to an unspoken bond transcending species. Mr. Henderson watched them, a knot of emotion tightening in his chest. Shame for his earlier disdain, gratitude for Rascal's unwavering loyalty, and a growing, desperate hope for imminent help. He focused on the sound of Rascal's lapping, on the steady, if shallow, rise and fall of McGregor's chest. These fragile signs of life were his anchors in the long, agonizing wait. The night, he knew, was far from over. Lights through the trees. A faint, almost imperceptible tremor, a low thrum against the backdrop of the forest's sigh, reached Mr. Henderson's ears. He strained, holding his breath, convinced it was just the wind or the thudding of his own anxious heart. Then it came again, undeniably. A distant, high-pitched wail, rising and falling, cutting through the oppressive quiet. It was the siren. He wanted to shout, to cry out, but his throat felt thick with dust and disuse.
Instead, a hoarse croak escaped him, a sound swallowed by the vastness of the trees.
Rascal, who had been lying with his head gently resting beside McGregor's hand, lifted his ears, a low growl rumbling in his chest. It wasn't a hostile sound, more a deep, resonant acknowledgement. McGregor too stirred, a weak moan escaping his lips, as if the distant sound had pierced his fog of pain. The siren grew, no longer a phantom, but a tangible presence. It pulsed, rhythmic and urgent, drawing closer. Soon another joined it, then a third, weaving a cacophony of hope through the still air. And then a flicker. A strobe of red and blue sliced through the black tapestry of the woods, dancing erratically between the trunks. It was like watching a kaleidoscope of rescue, each flash a promise of warmth, of safety, of an end to this frozen nightmare. "They're here, Rascal," Mr. Henderson whispered, his voice cracking with emotion. He reached out, his hand instinctively finding the dog's head, stroking the coarse fur. Rascal leaned into the touch, a rare moment of acceptance. The dog's vigil had been unwavering, a silent, furry guardian. Mr. Henderson felt a profound shift within him, a complete dismantling of his earlier disdain. This creature, this nuisance, had been his and McGregor's anchor in the deepening abyss. The ground began to vibrate with the approach of heavy vehicles. Headlights, powerful beams that carved tunnels through the darkness, swung into view, crisscrossing the undergrowth. The forest, which had felt like an insurmountable barrier, was now being breached. Branches snapped under tires, engines grumbled, and the distinct crunch of boots on fallen leaves grew louder. First to emerge from the dense thicket was Sheriff Miller, his silhouette framed by the pulsating lights of a patrol car. His face, etched with concern, was illuminated by a powerful flashlight he swept across the scene. He moved with a practiced efficiency, his eyes quickly assessing the situation. Behind him, a younger deputy, then paramedics, their green jackets glowing faintly in the artificial light, and a doctor, her medical bag clutched in her hand. "Mr. Henderson, you called this in?" Sheriff Miller's voice, though calm, held an edge of urgency. He was already kneeling beside McGregor, his fingers gently checking the farmer's pulse.
"Yes, Sheriff," Mr. Henderson rasped, his voice raw. He's been here a while, and there's someone else." He gestured vaguely towards the deeper woods where the first body lay, a grim reminder of the day's unfolding horrors. Dr. Anya Sharma, a small woman with bright, inquisitive eyes, knelt beside McGregor, her gaze sweeping over Rascal, who, despite the sudden influx of strangers and noise, remained steadfastly by the injured man's side.
"Guardian, haven't you?" Rascal's tail gave her a nod. "Well, hello there, fella," she murmured, her voice soft and reassuring. "You've been quite the guardian, haven't you?" Rascal's tail gave a tentative thump against the damp earth, a small concession amidst the chaos. "Broken leg, I'd say," one of the paramedics stated, his hands already working to stabilize McGregor. "He's hypothermic, needs to get warm, fast." Sheriff Miller looked back at Mr. Henderson, his expression softening slightly. "And the other individual?" "Further in, Sheriff. Rascal found him first." Mr. Henderson pointed, a tremor running through his arm. He was already gone." The sheriff nodded, his jaw tightening. He turned to his deputy. "Deputy Hayes, with me, and bring the forensic kit."
Everyone else, focus on Mr. McGregor and keep an eye on the dog."
As the emergency team swarmed the scene, a wave of profound relief washed over Mr. Henderson, so potent it threatened to buckle his knees. The cold still gnawed at him, and the exhaustion was bone deep. But the terror that had gripped him for hours began to recede, replaced by a fragile sense of safety. He watched as they carefully attended to McGregor, their movements precise and practiced. Dr. Sharma, after a quick assessment of McGregor, turned her attention to Mr. Henderson. "Are you all right, sir? You look frozen."
"I'll live,"
he managed, a wry, humourless chuckle escaping him. He looked down at Rascal, who, even with all the commotion, hadn't budged from McGregor's side.
"It's this one. He's the hero."
Dr. Sharma followed his gaze, a genuine smile gracing her lips. "He certainly seems to be. Animals have an incredible way of knowing when they're needed." She knelt, offering a gloved hand to Rascal, who sniffed it cautiously before giving a tentative lick. "Looks like you found quite a friend, Mr. Henderson." Mr. Henderson could only nod, his eyes still fixed on Rascal. Friend. Yes, that felt right. Gloom, illuminating the muddy bank where illuminating the muddy bank where McGregor lay. Dr. Anya Sharma, her face a mask of focused concern, knelt beside him, her gloved hands expertly probing. "Femur looks compromised," she murmured to a paramedic, her voice low but clear. "Possible compound fracture. We need to stabilize him before we move him." McGregor, pale and shivering, managed a weak smile as Rascal, having followed the emergency crew down, nudged his hand. "Good boy, Rascal," he rasped, his voice hoarse with pain and exhaustion. "Good boy." Henderson watched from a short distance, a blanket draped over his shoulders, the warmth seeping into his chilled bones. He felt utterly drained, yet a strange lightness had settled in his chest. Rascal, after a final reassuring lick to McGregor's hand, trotted over to Henderson, his tail giving a tentative wag. Henderson reached down, and this time Rascal leaned into the touch, a soft rumble in his chest. It was a sound Henderson had never heard before, a purr of contentment. Sheriff Miller, ever the pragmatist, approached Henderson, notebook in hand.
"Mr. Henderson, we'll need your statement when you're ready. But first, are you all right? You look like you've been through a war." Henderson managed a grim chuckle. "Something like that, Sheriff. Just a bit weary." He glanced at Rascal, who had settled beside his leg. "This fellow, though," he continued, his voice softening. "He's the real hero here. Found me the first time, then led me to McGregor." Miller's eyebrows rose. "Is that so? We heard some of it on the radio. Remarkable." He looked at Rascal with a new respect. "We'll need to make sure he's okay too. Animal control will check him over." Henderson's blood ran cold. Animal control. The words brought a sudden, unwelcome chill that had nothing to do with the night air. He remembered Brenda Jenkins' exasperated complaints, Timmy's hushed tales of the scary dog. He remembered his own dismissiveness, his desire to be rid of the nuisance. "No," he said, the word coming out with more force than he intended. "No animal control. He stays with me." Miller paused, assessing Henderson's resolute expression. "Mr. Henderson, I understand the sentiment, but there's a process. We need to ensure the dog is healthy and not a danger." "He's not a danger," Henderson insisted, his hand resting firmly on Rascal's head. "He's family, and he's coming home with me. I'm adopting him." Anya Sharma, overhearing the conversation, straightened up from McGregor.
"Sheriff, if I may,"
she interjected, wiping her hands on a cloth.
"This dog's loyalty and intelligence are undeniable. He saved 2 lives tonight. He clearly has a bond with Mr. Henderson. Perhaps we can make an exception for a hero?"
She offered Henderson a warm, understanding smile.
Miller rubbed his chin, considering. The community would be abuzz with this story. A hero dog. It would certainly look better than having him picked up by animal control.
"All right, Mr. Henderson," he conceded, a slight smile playing on his lips. "We can arrange for a vet to check him out at your home, but you'll need to make it official, paperwork and all that." "Consider it done," Henderson said, a wave of relief washing over him. Rascal, sensing the shift in tone, nudged his hand again, his tail thumping softly against the muddy ground. The painstaking process of extracting McGregor began. A specialised stretcher was carefully manoeuvred down the embankment. 4 paramedics, guided by Sharma's precise instructions, gently lifted him, securing him with straps. McGregor winced, but remained stoic, his eyes finding Henderson's across the clearing. He managed a faint nod, a silent acknowledgement of their shared ordeal, and the dog who had brought them together. As McGregor was slowly and carefully hoisted up to the waiting ambulance, Rascal let out a soft whine, a sound of genuine concern. Henderson placed a hand on Rascal's head, feeling the tremor beneath his fingers. "He'll be all right, boy," he murmured. "He's a tough old bird." The ambulance lights, still flashing, cast a surreal glow on the scene as it pulled away, carrying McGregor to the hospital. The forest, though still holding its secrets, felt less menacing now, the immediate danger having receded. Henderson, exhausted but exhilarated, looked down at Rascal, who was now gazing up at him with unblinking devotion. "Well, boy," he said, a new warmth in his voice. "Looks like it's just you and me. Let's go home." The walk back to Henderson's truck, with Rascal trotting faithfully beside him, felt different. The path that had once been a source of annoyance and frustration was now a testament to an incredible journey. Henderson knew the story would spread like wildfire through the community. Timmy Jenkins, he suspected, would be particularly thrilled. And Brenda? Brenda would simply have to understand. The stray dog that had once been a menace, a nuisance, was now something else entirely. He was Rascal, the hero, and he was home. A new life for Rascal. The familiar squeak of the back door hinge became music to Rascal's ears. No longer a fleeting escape from a cold porch or a frantic dash from an outstretched broom. It was an invitation. Inside, the scent of wood smoke and old books mingled with the distinct, reassuring aroma of Mr. Henderson. Rascal padded across the worn linoleum, his tail a steady pendulum. He settled onto a faded rag rug by the hearth, a prime spot that now felt unequivocally his. Mr. Henderson, though still moving with a lingering stiffness from his ordeal, offered a gentle hand to scratch behind Rascal's ears, a gesture that sent shivers of contentment down the dog's spine. Days bled into weeks, each one cementing Rascal's place in the small cottage and the wider community. The routine was a comforting balm. Morning walks, not hurried or furtive, but leisurely strolls down the lane, Rascal trotting proudly at Henderson's heel, a silent guardian. Afternoons were spent napping in sunbeams, chasing squirrels, a losing battle, but a joyful one, or simply observing Henderson as he tinkered in his shed or read by the window. The anxious, vigilant edge that had once defined Rascal's existence began to soften, replaced by a quiet confidence. He still watched, but it was with the relaxed attention of a beloved companion, not a hunted survivor. The change wasn't just in Rascal. Mr. Henderson found a rhythm he hadn't known he was missing. The quiet hum of the house was now punctuated by the soft thump of a tail against the floorboards, the occasional sigh from a sleeping dog, or the eager clatter of paws at the sound of his approach. He spoke to Rascal, not in commands, but in conversational tones, sharing observations about the weather, speculating on the day's tasks. And Rascal, with his intelligent eyes and tilting head, always seemed to understand. One sunny afternoon, a small, excited figure appeared at Henderson's gate. It was Timmy Jenkins, eyes wide with awe.
"Mr. Henderson, is that Rascal?"
he whispered, as if speaking of a mythical beast. Rascal, sensing the boy's deference, offered a low woof, a friendly invitation. Henderson, leaning on the porch railing, chuckled. "Indeed it is, Timmy. Come on in." Timmy, who once told hushed tales of the wild dog with a mixture of fear and fascination, now approached with an outstretched hand, a small, slightly squashed biscuit clutched in his palm. Rascal sniffed it delicately, then accepted the offering, his tail wagging a slow, dignified beat. News of Rascal's heroism had spread like wildfire through the valley. The local newspaper, the Valley Echo, had run a front-page story, not just about McGregor's rescue, but about the stray dog who saved a life. The article, penned by a young, enthusiastic reporter, painted Rascal as a four-legged guardian angel, detailing his persistent warnings and Henderson's eventual, reluctant follow-through. It even included a small, grainy photo of Rascal, looking noble despite the circumstances. Brenda Jenkins, Timmy's mother, who had once loudly complained about the nuisance Rascal caused, now found herself at the general store, overhearing snippets of conversation. "Did you see the paper?" one woman asked. "Imagine, that dog! Always thought he was just trouble." Brenda, surprisingly, remained silent. She'd seen Timmy's adoration, heard his breathless retelling of the story, and even witnessed Rascal gently nudging a stray ball back to a toddler in the park just the other day. Her hardened opinion, like the winter snow, was slowly but surely melting. Sheriff Miller, while maintaining his usual gruff exterior, had even stopped by Henderson's place. It wasn't a formal visit, just a quick check-in, but as he left, he'd paused, looking down at Rascal, who was quietly gnawing on a bone. "Good dog, Rascal," he'd mumbled, a rare, almost imperceptible softening in his voice. The home vet check, a condition of Rascal's adoption, had been a formality. Dr. Sharma, having seen Rascal's loyalty firsthand, had simply signed off with a smile and a pat, declaring him in excellent health and temperament. The community, initially wary or dismissive, now saw Rascal through new eyes. He wasn't just that stray dog anymore. He was Rascal, the hero who had averted tragedy, a living testament to loyalty and intuition. People offered him scraps at the market. Children called out his name, and even the most cynical farmers nodded in acknowledgement as he passed. Henderson, watching his dog absorb this newfound affection, felt a deep, unfamiliar warmth spread through him. The profound bond forged in the harrowing depths of the forest continued to deepen, strengthened by every shared glance, every gentle touch, every quiet moment of companionship. Rascal had not just found a home, he had, in his own quiet way, created one, not only for himself, but for a man who had long lived in solitude. His new life, it was clear, was just beginning.